1BTN 101.4 FM. 101.4 FM.
Live from Brighton, locally on 101.4 FM and DAB Plus and online around the world at 1BTN.FM. You're listening to 1BTN.
My name's Andrew Weatherall, Acid House Chancer, big in the early 90s. You're listening to My name's Andrew Weatherall, Acid House Chancer, big in the early 90s. You're listening to 1BTN, which in the words of Lux Interior means you've got good taste.
Give Me Some Love, The Love Corporation, one of Andrew Weatherall's finest remix, I was going to say.
Thank you very much.
Even though you couldn't remember if it was one of yours or not, which is...
No, I kind of recognise it. I've not heard it for a long time.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to presume, you know what I mean, that it may have been one of my mixes.
I always find
I remember I did it. Essentially, I did it. It was done in Manfred Mann's studio. I can't remember what it's called now, but it was on the Old Kent Road, and I think it's now a Tesco's.
I loved your story that I heard actually very recently about the Manfred Mann track you played. Was it on Gary Crowley's?
Yeah. Oh, it's from Just For Me. That it's off the soundtrack of Up the Junction, and it's my kind of ultimate London record because I think it's played. I almost dread going back to watching the film. I've not watched it in years, but in my mind, it's when Dennis Waterman's walking through London in the early hours of the morning, and I just always used to play it in the early hours of when I'd come back from the shum or somewhere, or I'd been on a weekend bender and put it on, and I would play it, and it's kind of, as I said on Crowley's show, it's the moment I realised that I belonged to the city and the city belonged to me. You know what I mean? I'd only come 15 miles up the M4, but I'd made it to the land of Oz. You know.
Get it? No.
Yeah.
So if we go back down the M4, back to Windsor.
Yeah.
I mean, I know you've talked about it lots of times in the past and everything else, but growing up there and getting into music, was punk the first kind of thing that you, or was there things before that?
No, there were things before. I mean, I was brought up in a quite musical... My dad was into music. He was a bit of a stereo buff. And he was into jazz, but and he was heavily into other sort of standard middle of the road stuff, but also Barry White. He had the album Stone Gone by Barry White, which I always remember. I was probably about 10 years old. On the back cover, in the credits, it says spiritual advisor Larry Nunez, and I was like, wow, even at 10, like spiritual advisor. So yeah, no, I had a kind of musical upbringing, and then glam rock was happening. That, you know, it's a familiar tale of men and women of a certain age in the suburbs. They see David Bowie, they see Mott the Hoople, they see Mark Bolan. It's a portal to a parallel universe that's a bit more colourful. You know, I didn't have a bad upbringing, but it was just suburban, and I thought it was very boring. And like I say, to me, 15 miles might have been 15,000 to the land of Oz. So music opened up. Music was a kind of an escape. Not, you know, I didn't have a bad childhood, but I just found elements of suburban existence a little bit dreary.
Yeah, right.
You know, so yeah, it was glam rock, and then punk rock happened, and it's really difficult to kind of express to people that didn't experience it the shockwaves it caused. You know, it was an absolute cultural explosion.
So let's kind of look at things like the Boyzone thing, magazine.
Yeah.
I know you've talked about it a million times.
That's all right.
You know.
What would you like to know?
Well, the whole thing about it, and the thing that I was going to chat to you about is that, you know, and I've heard you say this before, and at the time it really was like the kind of village paper for Acid House and the Balearic.
Oh yeah, it became that by default. Because I think we'd put out a couple of issues before. We were going to parties and we were all looking for something new. And then it wasn't even called Acid House, and we just happened to start going to the Sherman Future and Clink Street, and we started writing about it. So yeah, but by kind of default, we became the voice of the nascent acid house scene.
I always remember going to American Classics in the King's Road and seeing that there, and the cover saying "Drop Acid, Not Bombs," which immediately drew me to it. And I think the cost said £1 across the top of it. I immediately thought.
I think if it had that drop acid, I think that's when we'd gone full acid. You know what I mean? That's when we'd gone over we'd gone over into the actual official Acid House newspaper.
And then flicking through it and seeing this headline, Bermondsey goes Balearic, I thought, I'm buying that. And then,
I was surprised. I got Terry very kindly gave me they put the annual out a few years ago, which I understand now goes for a lot of money. I should have asked for a couple of copies. And I was dreading it. It was like that kind of dirty secret, you know what I mean? It's like I didn't want, it's like, I thought it'd be like reading your teenage diary or something. And I avoided it for months and months. And one day I just thought, I must, my therapist says I must confront my past. So I opened it up, and it's actually all right. It's quite fun, it's quite funny. It's full of like sort of naive, ill-informed left-wing politics and crap poetry. But hey, what fanzine wasn't?
Yeah.